Shaina Bilow here. In today's video, I am going to show you how to seam together the shoulders of a sweater. This one happened to have been worked top down, but the shoulders are nice and straight with a little bit of short row shaping, but that shouldn't affect our seam here. This sweater was made with two yarns that I would not recommend seaming with. One is this boucle, and it could snag a little bit and not make for a smooth seam as you're seaming. And the other is this fine kind of lace weight wool. And the reason I wouldn't recommend this is because sometimes those soft lace weight wools can be a little bit weak. And if we're pulling a lot, this could end up breaking. So it has nothing to do with the quality of the yarn. It's just that knitting yarns are not always meant to be seamed with. So in this case, I will actually be using a different yarn to seam with. So you can use yarn from your stash. You want to find something that when you stretch it like this, like what I was doing before with the lace weight, when you stretch it like so, it's not going to break easily. That's what we're looking for here. All right, so I also have a lovely tapestry needle with a bent tip. This is another great suggestion. If you're new to seaming, get yourself a needle with a bent tip, one of these large eye blunt tapestry needles. Because it makes for a much smoother seam as we dive in. All right, so I'm going to start from right to left because I am right-handed. I'm going to cut the yarn. I'm going to take about 3 times the width of my seam. Cut the yarn. Okay. And what we're going to do is start on the outer edge and work our way in. So I'm starting right here. You'll notice too that my sweater is face up. I do my seaming here, the mattress stitch, with the right side of the fabric facing me so that I can see what my seam will look like as I am making it. That's standard practice with mattress stitch. All right, so to begin, I'm going to insert my tapestry needle up into the corner on the lower edge, and then I'm going to insert it up into the corner on the upper edge, or the other piece of the shoulder. And then I'm going to go back up into the first hole that I went into. And this makes a little figure 8 on the edge that closes up the beginning of the seam. Okay. Here, my next step is going to be to find the first clean looking stitch that looks like a little letter V. So this one right here. If you can see it as it's sitting on my needle, the two edges of the stitch kind of point down into the bottom like a letter V. Then I come onto this side and I'm going to look for the first letter A, or an upside down V. And they're a little harder to spot because the stitches want to pull themselves apart, but this is it right here. If you're having trouble seeing it, look down into your fabric, and sometimes they're a little clearer to see a few rows below. There's my A. And then your next stitch is going to be the very next one in the row. So I'm underneath this stitch right now. I'm diving in and scooping up the next stitch that happens to look like a letter V. And as I'm going, I'm also taking care to leave the finishing yarn loose as I go. And I'll show you why in a moment. Or I'll show you how this disappears in a moment. But the why, actually, of why we do this is so that we can see where we've come from and where we're going. So I have an easy time here seeing, my yarn's coming right out of here. This is another benefit to using a different yarn for seaming than you do for knitting. All right, so I'm going one stitch after the other. My needle starts on the top of the fabric, dives in, scoops up a stitch. Top of the fabric, dives in, scoops up a stitch. I'm collecting stitches that look like little letter A's on the bottom and V's on the top. That ensures that my fabric will have a cohesive look. All right, and after you've gone about an inch or two, I went a little farther than what I would recommend for a new seamer, you're going to pull this yarn tight, and you'll notice all that finishing yarn closes up right into the seam. You don't even see it. Technically, I could be finishing with hot pink, and you may not be able to see it. I would try as best you can, though, to get a color that blends in well to your fabric if you are getting using a contrasting yarn for seaming. And then I loosened up that last stitch before I started again. And I'm just going to keep going, one stitch after another. And if the odds are in my favor, I've had the same number of stitches on both shoulders. They should be equal. Typically they are. If you happen to have one extra stitch on one of your shoulders for some reason, maybe an error in the cast on or whatever it is, you can fudge a little bit by taking a half of a stitch on the shorter side. But for now, smooth sailing, one stitch after another, and every 2 inches or so you pull. And then you open up the last stitch so you can see where your finishing yarn is, and you keep going. Here I am at the last couple stitches. I'm going to continue grabbing the stitches, A from the bottom and a V from the top, until I get towards the end, right here. And it's kind of hard to discern where the V is, so I'm just going to grab a half of a piece there, right at the edge, and same here for the A, a half of a piece. And then I pull these tight. When I say tight, I don't mean cinched, I mean that I can't see the finishing yarn anymore. And then sometimes I loosen it up, give it a little bit of a relaxing tug here. And that would be the seam. On the inside, it looks like this. Not a big deal. It's lovely. You can then decide if you want to weave in your tails right now. I prefer to leave all my tails hanging until the very end of the project. So the last step for me is weaving in tails before I block. So that way if I need to rip something out I can, and also I just don't love weaving in tails, so if I can just do it all in one shot, for me that's ideal. So this is the one seam. After you finish that seam, you would turn the sweater around, and starting at the outer edge, going from right to left if you are right-handed, you would work the next seam the same as the first. Happy knitting!